I'd like to call the regular meeting of the Pelham Board of Education of February 24th, 2021 to order. Would everybody please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item 2.4 is the reiteration of the executive session motions. Sue?
The board met in executive session to discuss the proposed acquisition or lease of real property and the employment history of two particular persons.
Thank you. So good evening and welcome to tonight's Board of Education meeting. Although the schools were closed for a week since we met last, it's been a busy couple of weeks from an administrative perspective. During this time, Dr. Champ and some members of the board and I had the chance to meet with local and state government officials to talk about the governor's proposed budget for schools and issues we are facing and relevant concerns to bringing students back for more in-person learning. Dr. Champ and I also had the chance to speak with members of our community on this topic, and Dr. Champ convened her first school reopening task force meeting to share key updates. Additionally, in the past 2 weeks, the CDC released its school reopening guidelines, which perhaps did not give us as much clarity as we had hoped for, but it did give us some more direction on the return to full-time instruction. While Dr. Champ and her team of administrators have been considering what our plans for full-time in-person instruction might look like, the work of the past few weeks, paired with the latest community survey results, have provided some important further clarity and direction. It is important that the district carefully considers additional mitigation strategies which might be required when bringing more students back to the classroom and the proper time to make this kind of change in order to ensure that we get our plans right. As we have seen with some of the districts who have announced more aggressive timelines for a full-time return to the classroom, it is one thing to announce a timeline and it's another to execute the plans. It's also important that through our consideration of whether we can return to the classroom full-time this spring, that through our planning we are mindful of next year to ensure that we are doing everything possible to make certain that we are prepared for full-time instruction next school year. We look forward to hearing updates from Dr. Champ on this topic shortly. Tonight, we will also look forward to Dr. Champ's initial presentation of the 2021-2022 budget. Later in this meeting, we will approve a calendar for budget meetings. This schedule begins with tonight's overview of the budget. Next Saturday, March 6th, the board will meet from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. for its annual line-by-line budget review session. There will be 2 opportunities for further budget discussion and community input at our meetings on April 7th and on April 21st. May 5th will be our mandated budget hearing, followed by the school budget vote and school board member election on Tuesday, May 18th. So without further delay, I will move on to the rest of our meeting. This brings us to section 3, which is approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the regular meeting minutes of February 3rd, 2021?
So moved.
Thanks, Sue. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thanks, Vinny. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, section 4 is administrative and committee reports. 4.1 is the superintendent's report. Dr. Champ.
Okay, so thank you. Thanks, Jessica. And I'm tonight just going to dive right into things because we have 2 really important and rather substantive topics tonight to discuss. So, and Alex, I'm sorry if I maybe have switched order on you. We're going to be starting with the full-time in-person discussion. May have been there was a little bit of a change from this afternoon, so I apologize. But while Alex is getting that set, I am pleased to come tonight, as I said, coming tonight to bring you an update on our planning for full-time instruction. I feel like we have been, I look around at my cabinet and feel like we're coming up on a year at this point and feel like we've been having these same discussions in one form or another for the last year. And I think it's a tough milestone, I think, for everyone in the community, no matter what. And I think we all recognize the weight of that. And I think that all the more underscores how important it is these discussions move forward in a timely manner, but as you said, in a safe manner as well, to help us find the best path forward. So we planned all summer about how to come back to school. We spent the fall assessing and reassessing and tweaking and have been, as Jessica said, having internal planning meetings for at least the last weeks to months. And this week, we were pleased to expand those discussions out to first task force meeting. So our first meeting was last night. We'll be talking a little bit about that. Great opportunity to just share some overview of the planning that has happened and where we stand and the challenges in front of us. So tonight, I'm just going to walk us through some of an update of that information. And this was shared with the task force yesterday. And I'm going to just kind of kick things off. Here we go. So since the beginning of this, as you know, from even a year ago, the whole focus, even though we haven't explicitly put these criteria out here, our whole focus has been on the wellness and safety, well-rounded safety and health of our students, holistic health and safety of our staff. How do we deliver the best core curriculum that we can in whatever setting we're in an equitable manner? And then keeping our planning in alignment with requirements, guidelines, and whatever the most recent scientific research is at the time. And as I think everyone knows, that has been an evolving topic, literally on a daily basis sometimes. So we're continuing to monitor that guidance. At this point, as we'll talk, we probably have gotten as much guidance as we're going to get. So I think we have to do the best job we can with what we have. Alex, you can go to the next, there you go. So the main guidance, just for a quick point of review, that we have had since back in June is the New York State Education Department guidance, about 125 pages that we are required to adhere to, as well as New York State Department of Health guidance. That was about, I think, 45 pages. And those two documents, of course, were written pretty quickly and were not written hand in hand, so there are occasionally some conflicts or lack of alignment between the two, and when there is that, then the Department of Health guidelines rule. So that's the primary document that really we've been working with since June. And we have been requesting and advocating, and thank you to the parents who jumped in that advocacy effort with us and our elected officials for updates to that guidance, because we have learned a lot since June. There's now vaccines. There's a whole host of studies that have come out. We've been begging for updates, but what we're going to see is that the state is not providing those updates at this point in time. So we move forward with what we have. Recently, we all know as well, the CDC did issue an operational strategy and some new guidelines. We are not beholden to those. We are still beholden to New York State guidelines. But certainly we looked at the CDC to see how it informs our practice and what may come from it. I thought it was actually really interesting. I got to sit in a webinar with the CDC, the U.S. Department of Education, and National Administrators Association last week. And it was doctors from the CDC that talked us through the guidance and really the conceptual approach. And I actually found it really fascinating because it defined 4 different really zones and indicators to look at that could help schools to decide should you be in virtual, should you be hybrid, or should you be all in. And they identified data that they would recommend to figure out which of those zones you were in. Unfortunately, New York State does not have that data in that format, nor are they planning to provide that to us. So while it would have been useful, again, we're a little bit coming up short with what we're being provided. That map, though, is something that came from an NBC article that was sourcing CDC data that looked at the county level nationwide using they have the data apparently. I don't know why we can't get the data, but according to the data that they have, that's how they ranked the country. Of course, we can all know where we are in New York State, Westchester County, and we do fall into the red zone according to this particular article, which would be, I believe it's secondary schools in full remote and elementaries in hybrid. So if that is the case, then we're a little bit ahead of the game, which is great. And CDC said they, by all means, did not want people to close the doors if the doors were already open and working. So just a point of information. So we can go on to the next. We wanted to include as well an update on just kind of a snapshot. This is public information as well. This is the state portal. Every day our principals are required to input any cases or testing now that we have testing going. On a daily basis, any cases within the school environment. And so that you can see there the cumulative numbers from the district. We should add, this is only numbers that we are aware of at school. If the numbers are not reported to us, then we don't include them, or if we're not aware of it, we can't report it. The other piece is the system has been a little bit glitchy, so sometimes things are submitted, but they don't take, for lack of a better word. So it's not 100% accurate, but it gives you at least a snapshot. We've had generally small numbers since the beginning of the data collection at the elementaries, higher numbers at the middle school. You've got older kids and you've got more kids, and then the same thing at the high school. It very much parallels a lot of what we see in the research about the transmission rate not really the transmission rate, about younger students being less susceptible and older students, especially high school, being more like adults. We did have, and Alex, could you do me the favor of clicking on that, the title? We do have an embedded file in here just to share a little bit more detail. Julia Chung, our COVID queen, keeps amazing records. So we just wanted to share a little snapshot. If you could start, I think, from the bottom up. I don't know if I might have pushed the limits. Okay, so this is really just tracking our numbers since we came back after the holiday break. You remember we took a week post-holiday pause because we expected a bump. So we did see that. The first week there was first week back in January 9th. So we had a few cases that week, again, predominantly high school. Then you go to the section above that. That actually was a worse week where we had, looks like 5 at the high school, 8 at the middle school, and again, very few, maybe 1 at each elementary. From there, you can go up another week. So you can kind of see the trends. It was a better week, 3 at the high school, 2 at the middle, none at the elementaries. And then we had, we'll go up to the one at the top there. We had a 2 and a 5. This was probably, I think, one of our worst weeks. And that was the week of, looks like first week in March.
February.
I'm sorry, February. Thank you, February 10th. So 10 cases at the high school. And that was a tough week. And then now to where we are. 6 at the high school. That following week, only 1 at the elementary. And here we are. This was just the past week. 6 again at the high school, couple at the elementary. So it just gives you kind of a sense. So we do track week to week. We are seeing the bulk of the cases at the high school in particular, some at the middle school. And as we all know, unfortunately, that's been having staffing impacts. Thank you. Alex, we can go back to the regular. But just to give you kind of a picture of where we are. So I think we share that because we are still experiencing cases on a very regular basis. Even throughout the break, we had almost, I think we got through a couple days, but almost a daily basis through the February break, we were dealing with contact tracing. So it is still active, and that's something that has to still remain on the radar of informing our actions moving forward. But as I said, we are at the point where a number of variables have changed since we came back to school, those being vaccinations, onset of surveillance testing, and some clarifications around social distancing. So we're very pleased at this point that based on the information that we've been given, and this, again, information collecting about vaccines is literally changing on an hourly basis over the last couple days. We have not been able to require folks to give us that information because it's personal health information. But based on voluntary submitting of that information through our bargaining units, we've tracked that about 50% of our entire staff, not just teachers, but entire staff, should be fully vaccinated by the time we return from spring break. So that's including our custodians, who are the ones cleaning our rooms and who have pretty close contact with potential infection, as well as our teachers. Within that, really happy that we're at the point where by the end of this month, 50% of our teachers will be fully vaccinated. So thanks again to the advocacy, thanks to George Latimer for connecting us with Westchester Community College so that we could get folks in there very quickly. We are anticipating again that that's going to grow by the end of each month. Probably the max that we're going to see there is about 75%. So, and that's kind of what we're figuring at this point. Yesterday, we got an email saying that schools would need to report to the state how many teachers are vaccinated on a weekly basis. Today, we got the not yet email. So I think that, once again, the governor got a little bit ahead of the process. But long and short is I do believe they're going to be collecting that information to try to assess readiness of schools and prevalence of vaccination. So that's good news. One thing I will say, going back to CDC guidelines, I think we all know the CDC guidelines and came out and said that if someone is fully vaccinated and they're exposed, they do not have to quarantine within 3 months of the vaccination, of the fully vaccinated point. And the governor even mentioned that in, I believe, a press conference, but that has not made it to written guidance or regulation. So until that does, we have to continue to follow the guidelines that we were following prior, which is very frustrating to us, frustrating to parents, frustrating to teachers, but that's unfortunately the rules that we're still functioning under. I'm very happy that we also began our surveillance testing the week before the break. We tried a little bit. Today was our first real big day to start to work out the kinks. So we're really pleased right now. We're starting on a voluntary basis, again, because we don't at this point have the authority to require students and staff. So we're starting with those who volunteered. And we're going to be improving our process each week with the goal of reaching 5%, and within that to include 20% of our high-risk athletes. And then finally, social distancing. As I alluded to before, we've been looking for some updated guidance here. We haven't gotten it from the state. But in light of all these things, we really feel there should be some changes. So the one piece that we did get through Assemblywoman Paulin and the Assembly delegation, they really have pushed this issue on behalf of schools at the state level because they see us all trying hard to get our kids back in school, but feeling handcuffed or at least unclear about what direction to go. So this text came directly from notes from that meeting. So we do have from Assemblywoman Paulin on behalf of the state permission to print and share these direct quotes from that. So New York State Department of Health indicates that no change in guidance was necessary or contemplated, and community infection levels are not going to be established as suggested by CDC. So that's as I mentioned before. Unfortunately, that would have been very helpful because the main point is community spread really does have impacts on schools, even though schools tend to be lower. As the community goes, the schools are influenced by that. Either way, they're not going to be providing anything new to us. So they also stated that the state's present guidance allows for flexibility, and the guidance states ensure that social distancing of at least 6 feet or a barrier is maintained between individuals. So as part of that conversation, the takeaway from the delegation was that schools could be more flexible than maybe we thought at the beginning. That does give us the ability to consider going to a lower distancing in our classrooms as long as additional mitigation strategies are present. So that, I think, is probably the best guidance we're going to get. And I think that and looking at medical research and making some informed decisions is really our best path forward.
And Dr. Champ, that email and guidance came from her last week to us.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. Thank you. Yep. So again, to kind of catch up to where we are, we did establish an advisory task force to add to the planning that we've already been doing internally. We really know we've got a talented community, and in addition to getting a lot more expertise around the table, I figure it's a great way to just get some perspective, gain some transparency to the process, and try to find a way to do the best we can to address as many concerns as possible. And I'm really pleased that we've got such a great wealth of resources. We also have folks with differing opinions. We have parents on the committee who have children who want their children in full return to in-person, who have their children in hybrid, who have their children in full virtual. So for a variety of reasons, whether it's by choice, whether it's because of health issues, or comfort level. So it's a great wealth of diverse opinions with the same goal of doing what is in the best interest of our students. So as part of the planning and really in light of this information that Assemblywoman Paulin was able to provide, we have been, even prior to that, looking at how are we using our 6-foot distancing as is, how are we using our spaces as is, can we tweak it and improve it in any way? But now that this guidance has come out, we also have been auditing, and we've probably measured at least twice so far, all of our classrooms district-wide to see, we know what they held at 6 feet, what does it look like if we were to move to a 3 feet distance? As well, I think most parents are probably very aware that we administered a survey recently, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. We do have the reopening task force members. It's quite a large team. But it's wonderful to have that wealth of resources. So we've got our administrative cabinet, a large chunk of our building and district administrators who, again, have been planning at this for a year. So we feel like we know about 95% of we know the problems, and we know about 95% of the solutions. So the task force, I think, is going to help us to get to that last 5%. We've got a group of teachers association members who have joined on with us, representation from each building as well as the union leadership. They're joining our meetings during the day and the administrative meetings as well as the task force in the evening. So appreciative for their efforts as well. And then in addition, we have brought on, we've got 4 medical doctors from the community, parents, folks with expertise in communications, in operations, in education, in mental health and wellness. So we're really pleased to have those folks joining us, and we'll be meeting on about a weekly basis throughout the next month to try to make some early progress on this topic. So we did a parent survey, and we wanted to share the results of that. And really, it was pretty simple, and the 2 key questions are what we wanted to talk about here. We had a great amount of response. Some moms and dads may have both filled it out, so the numbers came out super high. But what we do see in that really are some pretty clear trends across really all levels. So the first question was, would you prefer hybrid or full-time in person, even if it meant 3 feet? So full-time in person is red and hybrid is in blue. So you can see pretty clearly there is definitely a strong preference to get students back in school, even if it means a 3-foot distance in our classrooms. And that was strongest at the elementary level, which makes sense for all developmental, social, emotional, all kinds of levels, even supervision and independence of learning levels. And then still a preference at the middle school, although not as high. And then high school, same thing. High school is inching closer towards a 50-50. So that's maintaining hybrid or shifting to the full-time in person. If we can go to the next one, this was maybe the harder question for folks to answer. And we actually heard directly from at least, I'm going to say at least a dozen, actually at least probably 2 dozen parents who did not feel they were able to complete the survey because they did not feel they could make an honest choice on this last question. And those were predominantly families that were very comfortable with the hybrid model, whether it be for health reasons or otherwise. They did not feel that there was a choice they could honestly make here, so they chose not to take the survey. But so that just from, and I know Jessica got many of those emails, as did I. So that to me puts about 25 more. These are in percentages, but that would put about 25 more in the mix on the prior slide. So with this, the choice was, if the district moves to 3-foot distancing in classrooms, would you choose virtual, or would you have your child come for in-person instruction? And again, in-person instruction is in the red and virtual is in the blue. So again, we see some strong indication of parental preference there. So what are our possible solutions? There really are, as we see it, only 2 paths forward. One is, in order to achieve that goal of full-time in person, one is more space. That's been our problem since day one. That's why we had passed a bond project in 2018, because we knew we didn't have enough space then. Or reduce our distancing in the classrooms. So if we look at the possibilities of more space, and this is the work that the task force is going to be undertaking in these next few meetings. When it comes to more space, we have, we've revisited some of the additional space options that were raised to us initially in the initial planning. The ideas that have surfaced are renting space. There is some, there's probably not enough. We're a very landlocked community, so is there rental space that could be made available to us? We have sought what we know of, and it has not been available. Doesn't mean that we stop asking, or that others asking might get us a little further down the road, but as of this point, we're not aware of rental space that could facilitate classrooms. We did put out an RFP back in the summer for tents as an option. It came back at an incredibly exorbitant price. I think it was, Jim, $350,000 a month. Significant to have tents on all the campuses, and then I think we only got 1 bid back out of any. So it was not viable from that perspective, but also there's a lot of red tape around tents. If we're using them for classrooms, less red tape if you're just using them for, say, additional space for lunch or recess. So to that point, we've put the RFP back out again. We figured we don't want to leave any stone unturned in this process. And certainly, folks have brought up the idea of the keeping the old Hutchinson building in service, if we're talking about the fall in particular. So that's something we may want to discuss, when we open up for discussion a little bit. So as I said, we've reissued the tent RFP. We have reached out again to OLPH and St. Catharines, and they've indicated the space is not available to us. We did reach out as well as to borrow furniture if we wanted to take a different approach, and unfortunately, most of theirs was taken when the schools closed. Those of that they didn't need. Pelham Manor has certainly expressed a willingness to assist with space. They have a lot of outdoor spaces. Not sure what potential uses that could be, but that offer is a standing offer. And then certainly open to other ideas. But space has been our issue as a community and school district for a while. So those are the options we have there, and there may be others. So then also we turned to look at what are our issues around reducing distance. So we have, our principals did an initial assessment of space. We had a custodian go district-wide over the break, and one person do a consistent measurement to see where we stand. So we're really double and triple checking that to see where we may have issues. And I'll talk a little bit, I think, actually, I'll mention that now. So we do have some issues around the district in this area. 100-year-old buildings, that's nothing new. I think we all know that. At our elementary level, we've got at least anywhere from at least 1 to 6 classrooms in any of the given elementary schools that are currently undersized, even for bringing back our students at 3 feet. So what we did is, and this is why we were appreciative for the parents who filled out the survey when they put their teacher name. Basically what we did, I took the time last week and went through how many students are in each class, how many parents said that they would keep their child on full virtual, so this minus that, how many students do we need to put in each classroom, what do our measurements tell us can fit. So in many cases we can meet the enrollment need at 3 feet, but not in all. So we've got some problem solving to do around that. The other area of space and real challenge, and it's probably another slide, is lunch. So I'll come back to talking about lunch. At the secondary schools, we've got actually a lot more challenge around meeting that 3-foot minimum. We've got bigger students and we've got higher enrollments. So we're at more of like a 50 to 65% of rooms don't meet that 3-foot threshold. It's much harder at the secondary level, though, to determine who is going to be on virtual and who's not. We had a higher percentage of students indicating they would stay remote, but because of the way those schedules as students travel through the building, you can't predict where they're going to be with any certainty. It is pretty clear that there is no guidance that really allows us to go below 3. So that really is kind of the floor of what we're looking at. So we're going to have to do some problem solving around what do we do with those classrooms where putting all of the students who want to be back pushes us under 3 feet, down to 2 feet distancing or side-by-side distancing. So that's one of the problems we're working through at this point in time. We're fortunate, I think, a lot of districts had a lot more students selecting full virtual instruction than we did. That's one of the biggest other factors in addition to space. Many of our students have continued to come in person. So that's classroom space. Logistical considerations are things like how are we going to handle lunch? Now at the elementaries, we've had hybrid. They're 6 feet apart. During lunch, they take their masks off. They have their barriers. So we still have the mitigation strategies of distancing and barriers. If they're now 3 feet together, we've lost that distancing mitigation strategy. And I think we're at the point right now of and this is again one of the questions for our committee and our medical experts, what's the comfort level of having students sitting 3 feet apart without masks and just barriers? That's something that I think is concerning to a lot of us. So we're having to troubleshoot around lunch. And of course, better weather, outdoors, tents, those things are the easy resolutions. It's things like what do we do on rainy days when the students can't go outside and we have to have a full class eating together. So those are some of the discussions that we're working through at this point. Mitigation strategies, if we go in this direction, do we add additional mitigation strategies? One of the requests that's come forward and we've heard it some from parents and certainly from our teachers, is the request for air purifiers to assist. If we're going to increase the density, what can we do to improve the air quality? All of our HVAC systems have been cleaned, upgraded, service, are fully functioning and have been since the start of school, but what could we do to increase that just a little bit more? And then, as I said before, our major concerns are the classroom space and lunch. I will highlight too lunch at the middle school and high school. Excuse me. Another area of concern right now, we've got, since we took half the desks out of the classrooms, a lot of them are now in the cafeteria, and that's how we're doing lunch in the middle school and high school, is we've got desks sitting 6 feet apart. If we bring all of the students back, all those desks have to go back into the classrooms, which now creates a furniture issue in the cafeteria. We either have to go to lunch tables with dividers or procure more furniture. So we're doing some outreach to local colleges who may not have students on campus right now, may be able to loan us some furniture. That's one of the requests for ed from OLPH. So it's those kinds of logistical operation sort of issues that we're working our way through at this point in time. High school is going to be a little bit more of a challenge. On good days, the high school is no problem because they have open campus and most of the students leave. On rainy days, when you now have to have all of the middle school kids inside for lunch and recess and high school kids staying, that's our big challenge in that regard. So again, we're working through that. So just to get a little bit more specific and to get kind of towards the end, and then we'll open it up for some discussion. These really are the issues that we're looking at the K-5 level. I've mentioned a lot of these. We would need longer times for arrival and dismissal. We know how to do it now. We know that doubling, we would just need to add some time to that. So we're likely looking at, and this is probably good news, expanding more to what feels like a normal school day. CDC cohorting recommendations say that if you are going below 6 feet, then cohorting becomes more important of a strategy for contact tracing as well as mitigating spread. So that's something just for us to keep thinking about. We've already talked about lunch, recess. If we can figure lunch out, I'm sure we can figure recess out. And again, the question of, are the barriers suitable? Are we comfortable with them as the mitigation strategy at a lower setting? Even little things that teachers have brought up in the planning discussions about what do we do with student belongings. We haven't been using our coat rooms and lockers at the elementary or at the middle school and high school for that matter. So when you only have 10 students in a room, you can have their backpack there or a little crate next to their desk. But now you put everybody back in. How do you make sure that the classroom is safe to move around? Do we look at going back to using lockers and cubbies, or do we hang the backpacks on the chair? It's those little things, but those are the real things that make it very viable for students to be back in the classroom. So we're working through those issues. How are we going to continue to provide our virtual students their education at the same time? We certainly still need to do that. We'll need to continue to support them, probably in the virtual office hours, just a timing adjustment. But an important thing too, as we talk through this with our teachers, when you have half and half students in the classroom and half at home, you can kind of divide your attention half and half. When you've got the bulk of your students sitting in front of you, your attention is going to be going there, especially if you're worrying about masks and worrying about staying separate and making sure that students are doing what they need to do, which does mean there's going to be a diminished experience for those students on full virtual just by nature of the teacher's attention. And that's something that we want to remain attentive to. And the other piece that may help with this, we've got a lot of in and out, which has been, and by that meaning a lot of families, choosing to be in and out, whether it's to accommodate travel, illness, quarantine, or just preference, for whatever variety of reasons. We may need a more firm commitment for parents. We need you either to commit to being all in, so we know to expect you, or to be full virtual, because it does impact the planning of the teachers. So again, if we're bringing more students in, they're going to be planning for more students in, and we're going to need a little bit more stability out of consideration for them. Going to the secondaries, very similar. Probably need to adjust our bell schedules again to expand more to a full day. Having 5 minutes between classes has really been helpful to keep the density in the hallways down. So for doubling density of students, we feel we need to maintain that. Same questions, barriers, lunch, recess, how are we going to manage those? Band, orchestra, chorus, that is something that the guidance has been very clear that 12 feet really is a standard on those things. So we've still got to work out how is that going to work and physical education when they're doing aerobic type activities. PE on rainy days, so that's like the perfect storm, no pun intended. But when you've got all the middle school kids in for lunch and for recess, and the high school kids don't leave for open campus because they don't want to get wet, and your physical education classes can't go outside. That's literally the perfect storm, because the answer to most of those questions is use the gym, use the gym, use the gym, use the bleachers, use the gym. We can't all use them all at the same time. So again, things to be solved. And then again, as I mentioned before, we're continuing to see cases there at the middle school and high school more so than our elementaries. So, that could be an indication of not being quite as ready at the middle school and high school level, but that's something we have to continue to weigh out as we move forward. So finally, one of the things we're hoping, again, with our task force and the medical potentials, medical experts there, is for them to be able to give us some advice on what metrics could be useful to us as we move forward. We are doing surveillance testing. Is 5% enough? Should we at 10%? I know Julia doesn't want to hear that, but should we be at that level? Is that useful? Is it not? Is community spread our number? How do we get that data? What is a number of, let me rephrase that. If we can do some benchmark testing of cases in the environment, what is an outbreak? What is an increase that's worth consideration and might tell us that we've gone maybe a step too far? So we're really looking for the guidance there, but I'm thankful that we're able to do the internal testing to have that as a piece of the puzzle. And then as we look at things, as far as a timeline, if we go in this direction, there's a number of things that continue to just keep pointing us towards post-spring break as being a real ideal opportunity to make some of these moves. And part of that is the current caseload at the high school, because we're continuing to experience it. As I said earlier, vaccine rollout, will have 50% of the staff fully vaccinated by spring break. We'd probably be closer to 65% of teachers by then. Yes, the CDC says it doesn't need to be fully in place, and we recognize that, but we also recognize that we do have to care for the well-being of our staff. Coming back, spring break is early this year, thankfully, but coming back after it will certainly give us warmer temperatures, so windows are going to be able to be out open much more than they are now. Outdoor space can be used a lot more, so just more opportunities to be outside, which is safer for everyone, which would help support the increased density. And this would also give us time for some furniture adjustment and procurement. As we've looked into air purifiers and additional dividers for teachers and maybe purchasing of additional desks, there's generally been about a 6 to 8 week lead time is what we've been indicated on most of those things. So again, the procurement of those, moving furniture back into classrooms, et cetera, all seem from our perspective to point towards post-spring break as an ideal time to start moving some potential phase in. And then finally, if we're to phase in, we would look certainly at considering a phase in at the elementary, our focus towards the elementary grades first. We likely would look at bringing a couple grades back at once, just based on the logistics of how our buildings run. The principals said having a couple grade levels in, maybe wait a couple weeks, see how things go, never in the next group come in, would make the most sense at the elementary. And at the secondary, principals indicated they felt like grade by grade phase in would be the most manageable and logical for them. And we would be using the metrics that we determined through our task force and whatever else can be provided by the county and state to guide how we're doing, measure how we're doing, and make sure that we're still moving forward safely. So with that, I'm going to pause finally, presented a lot, and just open it up to the board for thoughts, questions, reactions.
I have one very specific question. So right now, open campus at the high school includes what grades?
We expanded it to 9 through 12 this
So
year.
it's full 9 to 12?
Yes.
And has there been any discussion about doing so at the middle school?
No, if you know Miss Sabia.
Yeah, I'm just asking the question. Yeah,
They're her children.
Once that
We
genie
have,
comes out of the bottle, you can't put that back
exactly.
in, too.
yep, okay.
We really haven't. I think we do have some developmental concerns about opening the the reins a little too loose.
Yeah, I guess my question was more around kind of differentiating between sixth graders and eighth graders, perhaps.
We could certainly ask the question. Like I said,
Absolutely.
I know what Ms. Sabia will say, but
Can you, what exactly are the dates of spring break this year?
The last week of March. We come back
yeah.
the Tuesday after, we have the Monday off after Easter.
yes.
So the Tuesday is April
Dates?
7th or something like.
I'll get to it momentarily. We come back on April 6th.
Okay.
Yeah,
The
we,
Tuesday, right?
yeah, we're out March 29th through April 5th. We come back on Tuesday, the 6th.
Okay. So it's about a month away.
It's 4
Comes up
weeks.
quickly.
At the end of this week, it's 4 weeks.
Until spring break?
Until spring break, yes.
Now, Cheryl, you had mentioned when we bring back, you're looking to do 2 grades at a time, is that correct?
At the elementaries,
Yeah,
potentially 3.
potentially 3, and would that be K1, 2?
Yeah, we would want to start from the youngest.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be clear on that.
Yeah, thank you.
Jim, this is a question for you. Do you think we're able to get the air purifiers in a month's time?
We've reached out, we've received quotes, they're telling us it's a 45-day lead time. So with the green light, we can go ahead and do that.
And actually, we were hoping to get a little indication from the board of that tonight, if you're willing to, or if you're giving us a green light to move forward. Those are on state contract.
Right. So we can get
Get
them
reimbursed.
through an existing bid, which is good. Again, it's what we're looking at is used in a similar district, a nearby district, but at the same time with our supplier. They may not be the same district-wide, depending on supply issues, because certainly this is an item that's in quite significant demand.
Yeah, and to be clear, it's not BOCES, it's state contract, so
Okay.
it wouldn't have the same reimbursement.
Right.
But BOCES was not able to procure something like this for us.
Okay.
And Jim, what's the timing on the tent RFP?
That's going to be back on the 16th. So if it's favorable, that's something that we wanted to have back in time for the board to be able to take action prior to the spring break timeframe at your meeting right before the spring break.
Do we have any expectation there's going to be more interest this time than there was last time?
I think we expect to see a little bit more interest in just that. I don't think the demand was as great as what they initially sought it to be. I mean, that's just kind of anecdotally what I've seen throughout with different districts. Same time, we also have the smaller portable tents, unused ones, that we didn't have to deploy during the fall. So we still have them, and if we reach a point where we don't need them, the supplier we purchased them from will take them back. So we're in a good spot with the portable ones too. But we're gonna reach out to them all, as I shared with you, I think in the fall. One rather large vendor closed up shop, so it didn't leave a lot of people in the marketplace.
So just to be clear, these wouldn't be used for teaching spaces, but rather for sort of relief valves, if you will.
I think so. You're looking at them for mask breaks, maybe some small meetings, lunches, that type of space. Certainly in bad weather, they'd be large enough for folks to be able to stand under it, stay dry, have lunch.
What size tents were we looking at originally for
I think it was 20
$350,000
by.
a month?
I think we looked at shapes for 20 by 30, 20 by 20, and 30 by 30. So in a couple of different dimensions.
And would we, you were looking at one point as month to month for up to 3 months, I think. Would we structure like the rental agreement similarly to the September, December window of time that we had discussed in the
Yes,
fall?
we kind of kept it to the same month to month. So of course, the first month you would incur your setup and your takedown charge, and then you'd have a maintenance charge on a monthly basis after that first month.
Heading into better weather months, though, for sure.
Absolutely. And at the same time, we're asking for the options for lighting and the options for flooring, but they're not mandatory either. So we're really trying to kind of have it a little bit of everything on that menu of the bid sheet. So we'll get some flexibility in the pricing. We're hopeful. Again, we want to make sure we're not leaving any stone unturned here.
So, sorry, back to the air purifiers for a minute. The count Like, what's the count that we're looking at needing and
Well, as we
the
look at it,
approximate expense?
sure, as we look at it district-wide, you're looking at probably about 250 classrooms. Then you've got other ancillary spaces. So we're really looking at about 300 air purifiers. Your price point's between $500 and $600 per unit. The quote I have right now is $572 per unit. And again, that's with this one particular item. If you end up with a different one due to supply chain issues, that's kind of where you could end up. So you just use the 600 times 300, you're about $180,000.
Yeah.
Eileen, I think you had something, right?
Sorry,
You're
yes.
about to ask them.
I was going to ask, would we consider bringing back elementary only? Is that still,
I think with the task force, we said that I think we have to be open to different solutions for the different levels because there's just different issues. Different developmental issues, different social emotional, different academic maturity, but also different facility issues. So we haven't ruled out bringing all back, certainly. But I think the timing of that and how, and what it might look like at the different levels is still to be determined. And as I said, I think part of it is going to be facilities and cases. I think in my mind, those are two of the biggest issues because we've got more classroom space issues at the secondary and more cases right now.
But I think I'm hearing you say that we wouldn't have the middle school, high school hold the elementary back from going.
No,
full-time.
not at all. No.
that's what sorry, that's really
No,
what I was
thank you.
asking.
Thank you for that clarification. Yep. We're not necessarily taking we took a K-12 approach to our initial model because that's the feedback we got, is families wanted something similar to depend on, but we know this is not a K-12 solution.
Well, and I know in Connecticut, it seems they're less than 6 feet earlier than we were, and it sounds anecdotally from districts I'm aware of that elementary was in full-time, but that in a lot of cases, the high school is still in a hybrid
Yeah.
model, and middle school varied.
Somewhere in between, yeah. Yeah, and I would say too, we are looking for the fall. I think there's a few things that may look different from the spring solutions potentially to the fall, something like full virtual teachers. I know that's been an ongoing discussion. We don't know where we're going to stand as far as what the state will require or not, and what we'll be able to provide, what variants will look like, what vaccines will look like for, there's so much unknown between now and the fall. But we do have, I guess, a new opportunity to re-envision what virtual learning could look like in the fall if we are offering that as well. But we may not be able to have those same options for this spring, given that, relationships are already established with teachers and students and families. So that's another piece of what we'll be looking. So the task force really will be looking at what do we do for the spring, but then also what do we have as backup plans for the fall.
That's extremely important to me. It's, I think, things change every single day, but, a month ago, I would have said, there's absolutely no reason why we're going to have to worry about socially distancing of any kind. I could see maybe masks, but by the fall, we'll be okay. But there's just so many unknowns, and I feel I really am thrilled that we're moving in this direction for this school year, but I feel very strongly that we, as quickly as we get through these decisions, that we move on and ensure that we're well positioned for the fall and that we're considering every option. I know when you look at a fresh school year, you can certainly make different decisions than we would make right now. But I just want to make sure that we know a lot more now, and we're in a different spot now than we were this summer when we were making decisions about the school year. So, and certainly by the summer, we'll be in a different spot as we're making final decisions. But
I also have some concerns about, Old Hutchinson being part of the discussion without us having a full conversation about what that means. I mean, those of us who are on the bond steering committee know that certain decisions have been made. I think utilities is just one of them, right? That we have, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, but the utility capacity for one school building on that site currently doesn't mean that can't change, but I think that there are some very real conversations that need to be had for Old Hutchinson to even be part of the conversation, and I don't, want to give people the impression that that's easy to do.
Thank you.
Thank you for mentioning that, Sue, because I would reiterate, if that was even in the mix, that would have to be decided very soon. very soon.
And thank you. I mean, even with, you think about why we are where we are with that particular school and the failing facade, certainly our facade engineer is actually coming tomorrow to do another inspection. She has already mentioned it's been a difficult winter, so she'll be providing us with an assessment on that. We're looking at utility implications, as we talked about, with Con Edison and the natural gas issues, things that can certainly be addressed, but there would need some planning to do with that. And then, of course, what it would do to the rest of the capital projects and the staging of those and what else we could or could not get done in the meantime. Of course, that's the additional site work that would be delayed, the demolition, obviously, of the school, and then other projects that are funded by that bond, knowing we'd be incurring additional costs, we'd probably hold up. I would recommend we find out, we have a better understanding of what that full cost is before we move forward with other projects.
Yeah, I mean, I think the good news is that the Hutchinson project is on time and within budget, and so that's a great position to be in. But Jess, correct me if I'm wrong, we have already contracted for the demolition of the building, correct?
That contract or that bid has been awarded.
Has been awarded, yeah. I just wanted to make sure that that was accurate. So, that certainly, that is a factor as well, too.
It would be like a similar situation, like when we delayed the work at the middle school, high school, we had to ask them again for a bid to hold it for a year or whatever the period of time is that we're expecting. And it's a lot of things to negotiate in a really short period of time. Also, I'm thinking, as we're talking about this, how this plays into, in our planning for next year, the budget that we're about to start into season on. And I think Jess brings up a great point about how we can plan for something different. What we're doing now and what we're talking about full-time in person this year could be different from what we do in the fall, and planning for the worst case and everything. But we also need to plan that holistically as we're moving into the budget and making sure that we can support those decisions that we want and bring our kids back into school and give them the good education that we want to give them.
Another good use of the task force's time between your administrators and the parent involvement and the experts is, as you think about the capacity issues at the elementary school, we just had the opportunity to tour the new Hutchinson school, which is, I cannot wait for people to see. It's phenomenal. And granted, I'm like so spatially inept that without the walls in, it seems like we have like all the space in the world there, but the classrooms are much bigger there. It's a new school. We have a huge gym. We have a cafeteria. There's certainly, I just couldn't help but think like, what problems could this solve if we had it right now? So, I mean, that's another way to look at it too, is I don't know how much more. Let's just say we need to stay within 3 feet in the fall. We need to stay masked, and we would have perhaps more students in who feel comfortable being in person. Like, how much could that new building help us? Is that all we need, or how much more do we need, Because that's one facility on one site, and keeps us on track with our bond project too. But, I mean, I walked into that gym and I thought, how many kids could we put in here if we had access to this right now? I mean,
Yeah.
it's this size, right?
Yep.
Another one of these at an elementary school, plus a cafeteria, So as you're seeing those like soft spots in the other elementary schools right now, in terms of what we're working towards right now, how can that building help us? Thank goodness it's on time.
Okay, I'm sorry for all the air purifier questions. I just have one more, which is that can we order them in batches? Do they have to be ordered all at once? I mean, because if we're talking about a phased-in solution, do we have to pay $180,000 right away, or can we get half and then half when we're ready for them?
I'll ask. My belief is we could order them in batches. I think the only risk, of course, is depending on their supply chain and
Sure.
And their demands as it grows. But we can do it in quantities of 100 or whatever that may be.
I'm also wondering about the air purifiers. Are those a component that this phase-in is hinging upon, or are we willing, like if it's 45 days, that's not going to hit the time that if we're talking about a time frame after spring break, we're not quite going to make it. So are these a go, no-go element, or are we going to be able to phase in and be okay with it without them? Because it sounds like that might be the situation.
Yeah, I would think, I mean, if we've made the commitment to move forward on them and they're in process, I don't think that would be deal breaking.
Right, okay.
Well, our elementary school window's open too, which is
Right.
something that
Also
the
in
middle
April,
school
you
windows
can-
don't open,
Yeah.
you know? So that we have that going for us.
Right.
too. And it's not frigid out in April.
Jim, I have a question. I know we've talked about this before, but if we're talking about $180,000 for air purifiers, which, you know, have a certain lifetime of use, we had a conversation a while ago about the possibility of retrofitting our current system to upgrade to MERV 13 filters, and I think the discussion was that we would reduce efficiency if we put a higher capacity filter on. How much would it cost to retrofit the system so that we could use the filters, or is that even possible?
I really don't have the full answer for that. I just, when we did our latest filter change, we made sure anything that could be upgraded to MERV 13 was upgraded to MERV 13. Everything else falls between the 8 and 13 range, which again fell within the guidance
Right.
that we have. Really, the upgrades in many of our buildings, they're older buildings, so it's building-wide ventilation. In this building, it's probably, I'm speculating that that's probably just a greater expense here. Generally, HVAC upgrades can be fairly expensive.
This building is newer, so it's probably less of an issue here, right?
Correct. We'd have to look and see what the equipment up on the roof really allows for, and the stress. As I understand it, it puts more stress on the equipment it creates greater resistance for pushing air when you have the greater MERV number there. And then, of course, at New Hutchinson, everything will be MERV 13.
Right.
Are these purifiers utilizing UV or no?
They do not. They're HEPA filters.
Okay.
1 year filter on it, but they do not use UV. State guidance hasn't changed with UV right now. They want it in a central system. They don't permit it in a portable type of a system.
Okay.
With respect to the air purifiers, I understand that they can bring a great deal of comfort to the teachers, and I don't want to minimize that. But are they really useful? Is this going to make a difference in the classrooms before we spend $180,000?
Well, they will clean the air. That's what the HEPA filter will do. As we looked at the guidance, the first step for ventilation, open the windows. The second step is you can have exhaust fans, which we have ordered more fans for the classrooms, simple fans that you can put in front of the windows that can exhaust air. They don't recommend pushing it in and blowing around a lot of air, but open windows are helpful. Exhaust. The third item that I saw was if you wanted to, you could do air filters or purification, and then of course I think, as I recall, the last step was of course the large wholesale renovation of your entire HVAC system.
Well, the air purifiers aren't a panacea. So, you know, think about the volume of air in this room. If you put an air filter in the corner, it's going to not do much. So how many cubic feet per minute circulates through the air filter? How many times does the air change over in each room in an hour? So those are the metrics that you use. So I don't know what we're buying, but, you know, my guess is if it's one air change an hour, it would be a lot. So, you know, it's not a panacea.
My understanding is the mitigation measure that makes people feel like we're doing everything that we can, you know, and it seems like a part of the rollout that other districts are considering.
Yeah.
There's so many unknowns, but it's like if you can add mitigation factors in that make people feel as comfortable as possible, then I
Yeah.
just want to know it'll be useful to us next year, because it seems like a huge cost to incur for 3 months.
Yeah, and I was just going to
School year.
say that I think we'll actually find it to be more useful next year as we get into the fall and winter months again. Because I think, like you've said, we're probably all still be wearing masks, hopefully distancing and things like that will not be as important, but I know that it would definitely provide something that we, in addition to what we were able to provide this year. And I think that's the long-term value in it.
I don't know if I missed it in the presentation, but what are the next steps with the task force? Like, I know they met once, like,
Yes,
and this is, I mean, I don't know if this was this sort of had a plan in it, but this isn't a full plan. The task force is planning to meet again and
yeah.
further
So
inform.
the task force really is, and I should have mentioned this at the beginning, the purpose for them really is to be an advisement group to us. Certainly to help us with some problem-solving, brainstorming, but predominantly, we're going to continue to meet more internally and then come back to the task force each week with progress and updates and plans, get their feedback, get their advice, guidance, and continue our planning internally. So we've got meetings scheduled weekly throughout this month. And I would imagine that we will, I'm hoping by the next regularly scheduled board meeting that we should be able to have something, again, more of a specific
Plan that's
for
been
you.
reviewed with them as well.
Yeah,
By then, we'll certainly have a sense of how many cases we have in our schools. I mean, again, I know we're
Yeah.
separating out elementary, middle school, and high school, but one thing that weighs on me is having kids at all the different, in all the buildings but high school, is seeing the impact of quarantines. And if they don't, if we don't yet adopt the CDC guidance, if New York State doesn't adopt it, and teachers who are vaccinated still have to quarantine, and there's still infection in the community, you're every time I send my elementary kid in, I'm thinking, oh, he's only interfacing with 10 kids and a teacher, maybe a music teacher or something, versus my middle school kids who are, the odds of getting quarantined are so great, right? Partially because there's more cases there, but partially just because of the number of kids that they're interfacing with. There's like, pick your odds, right? So if we were to open the doors tomorrow, I just worry, and I've said this to many people who have reached out to me, I worry that at the elementary level, we're going to close more classes than we've been closed right now. Our hybrid model, when we have cases, has saved us because of the fact that certain kids maybe are infected, but they haven't been in the classroom in 5 days' time. So that's why I see timing as being very important, and I'm imagining that by the time we get towards the end of March, our numbers are quite different, but I'm hoping in 2 weeks we have a better indicator of that direction. I'm very hopeful about all this, but
yeah, we should.
I'd want to make decisions that are productive and not holding us back in any way in terms of the way we're operating right now.
Yeah, and that's our goal as well. Definitely.
The elementary families have had it good as compared to
Understood.
middle school and high school
Understood.
with quarantines.
Good.
Does anybody have any other questions? Very good. So
Okay.
thank you. We'll look
Oh, you're
forward
welcome.
to
Yes.
more answers and a more updated
Yeah.
timeline.
Absolutely.
At our
Yeah,
next
we'll have
meeting.
that for you at the next meeting.
In the interim, we're going to have one PTA council meeting. Do you know the
That's
date, Leah? Just want to remind the community that's
Next week. I think.
typically right after our board meeting, sort of like in between our 2 board meetings, another place everybody's welcome and can hear more information about a variety of topics.
I think it's next Tuesday, Jeff.
Yes, next Tuesday.
Tuesday. Okay, so now we have our,
Okay, so now we'll
so
transition
the
to
budget
budget.
presentation, okay.
And I think Jessica alluded to this earlier. The tricky part of this, again, this year's budget is we in essence planned kind of a typical budget for a typical year, but recognize next year may not be a typical year. So I think the same way that we were able to be flexible this year with the budget and change a lot of where our spending went. We spent a lot more, I think, on monitors and substitutes and, a lot more personnel this year than we had budgeted for because that's what the circumstance required. We do expect that there will have to be that same flexibility going into next year, especially as we, resolve particular issues related to full-time as we just spoke about. So as we do every year, we work to develop a responsible budget that manages the district's short and long-term finances in a way that balances and the preservation of program, staffing, and operational efficiencies. We do also have really worked hard over the last few years to make sure that everything we do within it aligns to our strategic plan. focused around cultural competence, authentic learning, and the whole child. So you'll see some of the pieces that the budget highlights that we brought in do directly connect to those pieces. When we look at the budget at a glance, this year's budget, the proposed budget, will be $80,280,000. The expense increase budget to budget is just over $3.5 million. I should note the bulk of that is due to the major borrowing for the bond. We had talked about since 2018 the plan for how that debt would come on. We've used bands for the first number of years. This year we're budgeting for the major borrow related to the bond. So about 2.5 million of that money, of that additional increase, is related to new debt service. And which, of course, we will also see as we go through. We're recommending to partially offset that by use of debt service fund to help to ease the burden and to step that debt up as we've promised to the community. Allowable projected tax levy increase as a result of what we've proposed to you tonight is 3.13% increase. So this budget that we are proposing is at that tax levy increase of 3.31. It is worthy of note, though, we have not gotten our final state aid runs. Those we do expect towards late April. So we'll be updating that as those numbers come in. You do recall the general categories of the budget. General support, which is administration and everything that's non-teaching. Instruction is everything having to do and support instruction, whether that's staff or instructional resources. We do have transportation section, and it's a good opportunity to remind folks that even though we're a walking district, we do provide busing transportation for special education services, both within and outside the district. We do also we're required to provide for students attending private schools within a certain radius, as well as sports. Those are really our biggest transportation expenses, and we generally work with a consortium through BOCES for that. We have a community services section. It's a relatively small portion of the budget, but it's important because it's a custodial support and buildings and grounds support for our recreations department and their use of our facilities. The benefits section of the budget is where we have everything from health to dental, vision, retirement, workman's comp, unemployment, et cetera. That all falls in that category. And finally, interfund transfers is really kind of a place for the accounting of the ins and outs of debt service and various reserve use. The main drivers of the changes in this year's budget, there's quite a few this year. The big one, as I said, really is the debt service related to the borrowing for the 2018 capital improvement bond. 2.5 of that, as I said before, is related to that. Within salaries and benefits, that is basically driven by our collective bargaining agreements, and that comprises about 76% of the budget. That is down a little bit from last year, and I really want to thank our bargaining units because that's really a result of favorable negotiations. Last year, when our teachers and our clerical units came to the table recognizing the financial circumstance the district was in, they were just incredible partners in this, and seeing the likely in the tumultuous financial future the districts were facing. Our teachers, I just want a specific note, took a zero cost of living increase in that negotiation, and I think that is a real tribute to them, to their commitment to our schools and our district, and I just want to thank them for that partnership. So that really has helped to contain our costs in this line. Within it, there, of course, is money for those contractual obligations and those who we're already in contract with and those that we anticipate. We are in negotiations with our administrators as well as our building services unit this year. We also had to account for increasing pension costs. So those costs, the base of the costs rose as well as the percentage contribution rose for this year. And of course, our health insurance costs continue to increase. They went up by about 4% this year. We are continuing to maintain our contingency funds throughout the budget at approximately 2%. That's been our practice for a number of years now. That had, over many years in the past, boards had worked to bring that down to that 2% level. And so we are maintaining that. And again, that's where we do have some of our flexibility for uncertain years, like the one that we're in right now and the one that is to come ahead. We are maintaining our use of fund balance in the coming year, similar to what we did at really at the same level as last year. And that's with regards to two specific appropriated funds, and that's the carry forward, so about 655,000 of carry forward funds from this year into next year, as well as use of 600,000 from the ERS, Employees Retirement Service Fund, to provide revenues for this budget. We are, as well as I've mentioned, using debt service fund. We are increasing the amount, though, this year, again, because of that big step up in bond borrowing. So we're recommending appropriating 1.1 million from the debt service reserve to help offset that increase in this budget. Things that have helped us in the budgeting process, as much as it's a bittersweet help. We've got some real wonderful staff and great years of expertise that we are losing to retirement. We're happy for them, sad for us, but it does help us on the financial side. So 2 teachers, 1 school counselor, 2 teaching assistants, and 1 administrative support person are retiring. So the breakage, the difference between their salaries at the end of their career versus the salary of someone coming in, is usually a gain financially for the district. So all this really represents the year-to-year budget increase of 4.67%, but again, 3.2% of that is attributed to borrowing related to the bond. We did see, as a final revenue improvement, an increase in building state aid. You remember the last 2 years we've seen drop-offs in $500,000 and $500,000. This year we're projected by the governor's runs to get an increase of, an anticipated increase of $500,000, about $500,000 building aid. Jim and Jackie in the business office have continued to work with capital markets advisors. And through that collaboration, we were actually able to apply for about $150,000 in additional aid based on early start aid. So it's something that they've directed us to, and we were able to apply for that, in the process of applying for that, which we anticipate will give us about $150,000 more than the governor's aid runs. So that was great work. Appreciate that with Jim and Jackie and CMA. So those are your main drivers for the budget. When we look at the major revenue categories, certainly property taxes we recognize are the main source of funds for the district. We continue to be incredibly appreciative to our community. And this year the tax levy will look to raise about $67.8 million. In federal and state aid this year, we're receiving a bit of an increase, and generally last year we received about 7.1% in aid. This year we're receiving about 7.8%. Again, it's primarily due to that building aid that I just talked about. This year what you'll see as well, we're receiving both federal and state aid, and the federal aid is coming through the COVID-related subsidies. But we're going to see them more as pass-throughs from the state that in essence are plugging some holes in what would have been state funding. So it's fine for this year, it keeps us whole for this year, but when those federal funds come to an end, that likely will leave some gaps. And so that's kind of a cliff that certainly we're watching in the future. Miscellaneous receipts category, that generally is things like sales tax, tuitions, et cetera. So we see a small decrease there. Sales tax is better, I think, than we thought, which is great, but our tuitions are down just a little bit, so a little adjustment there. And finally, appropriated fund balance, as I've already mentioned, keeping those same categories, 2 categories the same, and increasing our use of debt service to help with offset bond costs. So when we look at the tax cap, which I think we're all pretty familiar in, I think this is year 11 of the tax cap. Proposed budget is built to be compliant with the tax cap. As you remember, tax cap is 2% of the CPI, whichever is lower. This year's CPI is at 1.23, so that's our starting point before taking into account exclusions and calculating in our growth factor. So once we go through the mechanics of those numbers, we wind up with our 3.31%. And Jim will be going over this in more detail at our Saturday line-by-line budget review and really going through the growth factor and the capital exclusions. But the summary really is the operating budget, the day-to-day expenses of the budget portion of that accounts for about 1.7%. The capital budget, so the borrowing from the bond and everything that goes into that side of the equation, represents 1.61% of that. You add those two percentages together, and that's what gets us to our 3.31%. And I think it's important of note, and this really does illustrate how the use of the debt service fund is helping us to step up our borrowing year to year. If we did not apply that $1.1 million from the debt service to this budget as a revenue, we would be looking at an allowable tax levy cap of 5%. Okay, so that's significant, I think, to note, to bring that down to the 3.31. That's the result of our use of debt service. And I probably said it before, not all districts have that debt service reserve, so we're very fortunate to have that, especially heading into the projects as we have been. In terms of budget highlights, and again, these really were designed to anchor and support our strategic plan. Probably first and foremost, we have budgeted additional funds for summer programming because we recognize our students they're going to have gaps. Every district, I think, is in the same position, and we wanted to budget ahead of time to make sure that we could offer additional summer programming to our students who are in most academic need. So Dr. Garcia will be working with the directors and the building principals between now and the end of the school year to certainly to assess students' progress, to identify students in need, and to design programs for the summer. So we planned ahead of time for that. We're going to be continuing professional development to support the social and emotional needs of our students, which is our Steps A universal DBT program at the secondary level. Finally, plans to train our last cohort of responsive classroom at the elementary level, which is great. Our buddy Earl is one of the best professional developers we've ever had, and we're excited to keep working with them. And as well as continuing to support and strengthen our multi-tiered systems of support systems, our services at all of the levels. Working to continue that. We know that students, especially as we phase back into school, it's going to be a whole different set of transition issues. And, our kids who have been told to stay separate and isolated for the last year are now going to be coming back into classrooms. So we anticipate coming in even this year, but then even going into next year, that we're going to have a lot of focus on the mental and wellness support of our kids. We also are looking at adding 2 teaching positions. Both really kind of have elements of restoration. A couple years ago, the board probably remembers we had a number of retirements and we eliminated some positions through attrition. We are really looking to restore the world language position that was eliminated a few years back. Our teachers have very generously picked up overages to fill some of those gaps for the last number of years. Thanks to the strong enrollment that continues in that program, we do want to replace that at this time, likely a dual certified position. The other benefit of this is, I've got a typo on there, World Language Coordinator. We transitioned World Language Coordinators this past year, and Valerie Lakestream has stepped into that role. And with that, we've also asked her to take on some additional responsibilities. So not only does she oversee world languages at the middle school and high school, she's also overseeing our FLES teachers at the elementary and our ENL program. So that has really added quite a bit of workload, but by the same token, it's provided strengthened our support of our English language learners, and we're in a better position to making sure their needs are met. So in wanting to support her and being able to really do that work at a high level, we're recommending that she has a slightly reduced teaching load, so that is also kind of a benefit of moving in this direction. We'll be able to cover the enrollment of the programs, be able to strengthen our support of English language learners through the addition of that position. And additionally, we're looking to add a science position. If you ask Dr. Callahan, that was something that was, it's a restoration of something that was lost years before I even came, and he has been a continued advocate for his department. And again, his teachers have really generously picked up additional overages, in many cases 2 overages, in addition to their full teaching load. So we're pleased to be able to recommend that to help supplement our science department and continue to grow that program. And again, many of these things are things that we continue to support on a yearly basis, providing teachers and students with the learning resources necessary, And this year it became all the more important, both the in-person as well as virtual learning environments. So tools that they can use at home, in school, seamlessly. The resources, software, and training to provide those. We're going to continue to provide our mobile learning to devices. Again, that's really an essential in the world that we're living in now. We were able, thanks to John Sabalos' creativity and funds management, to expand that to 3rd through 12th grade last year. So we're going to continue with that program. 6th through 12th, we'll get to take the Chromebooks back and forth to home. 3rd through 5th, we'll use them as a classroom-based tool, of course, unless we get into a position where we are in virtual learning and need to send those home. We're going to continue the expansion of our innovative flexible furnishings commitment that we made to the district, and thanks to the PEF for kicking that off. We have great libraries now to look at, and once we get our students back in school full-time, they're going to enjoy those even more. And continuing to continue our commitment to our class sizes as per the board guidelines. Just to round things out very quickly, in the technology realm, I already mentioned this first piece, continuing to support our Chromebook initiative. We're also replacing a variety of obsolete pieces of equipment and upgrading and updating. We're continuing our partnership with BOCES for our managed IT platform, which has been a great shift for the district. We're getting a lot of remote support and really getting issues resolved very quickly through the cloud. And because of the increase in our systems that are really dependent on technology, and it's everything from our surveillance cameras that came through the Smart Bond, all of the softwares that were implemented to help support learning, just a variety of our systems that continue to be implemented that are contingent upon technology. We're at a position where we really need more support from a network administrator position. So BOCES does have those services available, and we're recommending contracting with them to add that assistant network administrator to continue to provide our students in particular and our staff and our facilities systems the real support that they need to continue to be stable and to grow. In special education, we continue, as always, to provide and budget for free appropriate education for all students. We start with student need and we build our budget around that need and not the other way around. Continuing to support programs that meet the continuum of services and provide for all in-district as well as out-of-district placements for our services. And Julia and her department do a tremendous job in managing that and projecting those costs, because they know their students really, really well and have great relationships with the programs in the region. Moving into facilities, one of Jim's other areas of oversight and great partnership from John Condon, who oversees our facilities. We're going to continue to maintain our current levels of service, which is also including addition of, within that facilities budget, the addition of rent for office space and new administrative offices, both rental and certainly the move over to the 314 Pelhamdale. If you haven't been out by it recently, you should take a drive by. You've got a whole different outside as far as ramps and railings, et cetera. We're finishing interior renovations and anticipate that some of the members of the business office will start to move over there very soon, probably as early as next week.
Spring break time.
Okay, worst case, spring break.
Yes. We've got to start moving the other folks into our space for the
Yes.
swing time.
Yes. So we got, within the next couple of weeks, we've got some moves coming up, which is exciting. The facilities department also continues to district-wide efforts to install HVAC controls, lighting, and new ceilings, et cetera, which has just improved our efficiency district-wide. And the great part is we have talented staff, so we're able to make use of internal staff to do a lot of the significant maintenance and projects, painting, masonry, et cetera. Finally, our next meeting, where we're going to continue our budget discussion, is set for Saturday, March 6th. That's our line-by-line budget review, starting at 9 in the morning. I think logistically still have to work a few things out, but we do anticipate it being in person, depending on the sports schedules.
Why would we do that in person?
Why would we be in person, or why would we not be in person?
The basketball team needs the gym.
basketball team. We've got it, I didn't have a chance to connect with Chris Hodge on our sports schedules. Depending on the sports schedules, we may or may not have gymnasium space available for meetings.
It worked well last year virtually.
It did work well virtually, yeah. I didn't want to be presumptuous. If the board would like to go that direction, we
We were
could
in
do that.
person last
We
year.
were
at
in
one of
last
our
year we
last
were-
meetings.
Yeah, we were in person
Were
last
we?
year.
It was, yeah, we were in person.
It was the very
It was like the
We were
last-
sitting around talking about this thing called
We were in
COVID.
person.
Yeah.
We were
Wait,
talking
is that
about
day, the 6th is the last day of the season,
I know.
right?
I
think it is.
I
It was
did.
really fast last
I
year.
was dreaming about
It
it.
was really efficient.
So,
What about the cafeteria?
Yeah, it was
Can we
fast.
use
so
the
well, why don't, for now, why don't we just say the meeting is the 6th,
Okay, fine.
location to be determined, but it will still be our full-day budget review line by line, and definitely welcome the public to join us there.
But we,
So-
didn't we used to meet in the library, in the middle school library?
We did, we just have to see if there's space.
They're not going to play basketball in the
They are
library.
not going to play that.
We'll hear it in the library, but.
So, that concludes the budget presentation. If there's any questions? And I know, as I said, Jim will be doing a much more thorough.
We'll get the full.
I have one question. Something that always comes up in it's part of the budget handouts. How is our enrollment looking this year in terms of?
Probably in here.
It is probably in there.
We've got a section we have a section in the budget book.
I'm sure you do.
With the forecast and enrollment, and right now, as part of that discussion too, we're about 5 years out from our last enrollment study, so we're probably due for a refresh at the same time within the next year or so. I guess the question is, as for a later discussion, but do you do it now, or do you wait? Because again, there's a lot of, it's just not such a normal time right now with folks moving and whatnot. Would we be better waiting a year or two on an enrollment study? But that's kind of the discussion we're having internally right now. But there is a section on our enrollment and our forecasted enrollment next year, and certainly in the budget process, we talked a lot about especially what our K and 1s are going to look like, those grades, and our students who may have gone to a private school, or if their parents held them for a year, and
Or
again,
homeschooled, yeah.
what it's going to look like.
Yeah, I think a lot of districts are experiencing uncertainty about enrollment.
Yes.
And I think these enrollment projections are based on 5-year rolling averages, so it's historical. And I don't think, I would like to get a handle on it, I just don't know quite how to do that.
Another big factor is we've had so many houses turn over, so it's hard to know like how many of the
Exactly.
houses that sold had school-aged children and how many all the houses have sold, so how many new students have come in and moved into those houses.
That's right, and as we determined and budgeted for our staffing, we look at what we know of at a certain point in time, and really that's how we budget. We also know we put we also have those 2 contingent positions that we budget for every year, and that could very well be the purpose of 1 or 2 of those positions next year if we see a summer increase in enrollment that we can see. And Dr. Garcia's office does the registrar work, and they see that, and it's a constant practice.
How did kindergarten enrollment go? I know it was done differently this year because of it. Did we have a usual turnout?
Yeah. It was done differently. It was done at each school,
Yeah.
which was
I
better.
think there was some positive feedback
Yeah,
from that.
it was better than, bringing everyone to one location. The registrar went to each school. The one wild card is always Hutchinson School. So the number
is what? I'm sorry.
Hutchinson School. So numbers may be low right now on, February 24th, but, there's a lot more play that happens between now and September 1, especially at Hutchinson. Usually other ones are a little more stable. So, if once you hover around 46 in kindergarten, that's when things get tricky about looking to split into 3 sections.
Right.
So we're kind of in the 2-3 sections at each school at this point, but I'd lean towards always thinking more about 3 sections, there's always, you suspect that one school may never, it's not going to get the 3 sections. Then all of a sudden, it flips. And as you said, I think that I'm not a realtor. I'm sure there are people in this community which monitor it a lot closely than me. But there's a lot of flexibility and there's a lot of volatility in terms of people moving in. And that, I think, could actually influence what happens in kindergarten, not just kindergarten, but every grade level. That's why it makes it kind of a tricky situation, because you don't know who's coming back, right? If they're kids who are full virtual in their pods, you may make assumptions, and then we don't know how many people are going to be moving in versus those who've moved out, because if the world of work has changed, you don't need to live and work in a certain location. You can live anywhere. As you know, you've probably seen neighbors and people kind of uproot themselves saying, I don't need to live here anymore, I can live somewhere else. But then you have the influx of people from other locations, specifically the city, and it's volatile.
It just seems like people are moving. I don't know what the pattern is, but
Yeah, it's unpredictable in that sense. But we think kindergarten enrollment went really as normally as it usually does.
That's great.
And those numbers reflect, when you talk about the budget and how many sections you have, it's similar to what we have now. But again, Pelham is unique, where you have 4 elementary schools. You don't have one kindergarten section across the district, so you have to think about how many fit in this building versus that building. That's what makes it a little bit more unique here.
And a new Hutchinson building to work with.
Yes.
Yes.
Any other questions, thoughts?
I'll save them for the 6th.
We can't wait.
Save them for the 6th, virtually.
Best Saturday of the year.
Lunch will be provided.
I didn't know if that was still included in COVID.
Are we going to get barriers?
That's right, we need our own barriers.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, very good. Sure, we can move public comment up. We're going to have 2 public comment sessions because we have to have a special hearing. But I'll move public comment up for everything separate from the hearing. Do I have a motion to move our end of the meeting public comment up? Thanks, John. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thanks, Benny. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? So before we start public comment, I just want to remind people of the rules. Everybody's wearing masks and social distancing. Speakers may only comment once during the session and must state their full name and address for the record before speaking. We ask that you keep your comment brief to allow time for others to speak. Vulgar, threatening, and/or uncivil language will not be tolerated. Neither the Board of Education nor district administrators will be responding to comments or questions during the public comment. So with that, I open the mic.
Looks like everybody signed up.
Perfect.
Hello, Saida Ferrara, 201 Highbrook Avenue. Just some brief comments in response to some of the reporting. First, I will say that it seems like a lot of the roadblocks that we're dealing with in order to reopen full-time in person are related to space. That's not going to change anytime soon. So I think it might be time to consider some very bold measures, right? Things that haven't maybe necessarily been popular with the community in the back, but that it might be time to revisit, like, do we need to move kids in the fall to a different school, right? Do some of the kids at Colonial need to start going to Hutch? And some of the kids maybe at Saiwanoi go to another school, the Prospect, or, we might need to look at things that might not have been popular a couple of years ago, but that we just might need to implement now, even if some in the community might not be on board. So that's my first comment. My second comment, to your point, Dr. Champ, of equitable teaching of the curriculum, I would argue that now that we've been at this, for a year with hybrid and virtual, kids who have a 504 plan are not receiving an equitable curriculum instruction. The days if you look at a child who, like mine, who has ADHD, on the days when, he is not in school, when he's learning from home, and he's not getting the supports that he gets when he's in the building, he's not learning. So my child is receiving technically 2.5 days of instruction a week, as opposed to 5. Now, we are lucky that we are able to provide additional supports like tutors and therapists and whatever we might need, and we can afford additional help. But I would also argue that there are a lot of families that are not in a position to offer and pay for those extra supports. There are a lot of families in the community who have lost their jobs, a lot of families in our communities where both parents work and they don't have the extra help, and they might not be able to bring in the tutors and the extra supports. So again, those students are not receiving an equitable instruction. So I would urge you to think a lot about how you can support kids who have 504 plans, and how the current system is just, again, goes against our commitment to equity. Lastly, I will say that, again, I thank you for all the hard work that you're doing. I know that, just looking at the names on that task force, it's hard to manage those committees. I've, again, been on the other side of the microphone. But again, just sort of think beyond the next couple of months and really even the next year in the fall, because there's going to be different strains. There's going to be other challenges in relation to COVID. And this is always going to be, the space is always going to be our main problem. This is not going to go away. So we're going to have to push the boundaries and really think beyond. That's it. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Emily Upshur at 304 Highbrook Avenue. I have 2 kids in the schools, elementary schools, and 1, hopefully, starting kindergarten enrollment. And I am a licensed clinical psychologist with a master's in child development. And I'm not going to tell you all the data that I put together for this, but I will, in the interest of time. I do want to emphasize that I appreciate all of your hard work and recognizing the problems that are out there, and health and safety being a priority for our district. I do want for us to think more flexibly about what that health and safety is. I know the CDC measures really medical health and safety, but from a mental health perspective, we are seeing, even from the CDC data, enormous increases in psychiatric problems with children and families, even as young as age 5. So I really want to emphasize, to Zaira's point, as a district, we are legally bound to servicing IEP and 504 children. Those are legal documents. At the very least, I think we need to get creative around how to serve those populations. As a psychologist, I implore us to do that, because these kids are really suffering. There's a difference between children who are having a difficult time and children who are meeting clinically significant academic and psychiatric markers for distress. And so I hope that we can create sort of flexible solutions to that, potentially help integrate. So I know even not all IEP kids are getting served right now, but to the same extent, 504s are very much along those same lines. And psychologists are overwhelmed right now. So from a private standpoint, I imagine in the schools as well, but there's really little else that we can do from our side, aside from provide those kind of services. So I just want to emphasize that sort of where we can interpret the guidelines more flexibly, I think the risk ratio analysis has to be taken into consideration with mental health as a part of what health and safety would look like. Thank you.
Good evening. Maria LaRue, 171 Townsend Avenue. I have a statement I wrote just to help me guide through what I want to say. October 27th, 2020 was one of the best days of my life. I welcomed 20 fifth grade students into my classroom for the first time since March 2020. I teach in Nassau County, Long Island, and my district had successfully rolled out a second phase of full-time in-person instruction. Kindergarten and first grade had been full-time from the beginning of the year. Then, second and third grades were invited back into school in early October. And lastly, grades 4 through 6 had the opportunity to exit the hybrid plan and become full-time students. Parents had the option to choose remote learning if they were not comfortable with full-time learning. And luckily, that was a separate position that in itself, and it allowed for any immune-compromised teachers to teach remotely and from home. But what all this meant to me was everything. A little bit of normalcy in those crazy times. I did not have to plan, teach, or assess online anymore. No more Google Meets, detached and sometimes faceless students, and watered-down curriculum. I could actually meet with my whole class, get to really know them as individuals, witness the capabilities, create curiosity around science and social studies topics, and use hands-on approach to learning as opposed hands-off via video. Full-time learning has afforded my students to naturally socialize during class discussions at snack, lunch, and recess. Finally, an end to what seemed like forced conversations, sadly mostly with myself and the same few students and/or parents. I have also witnessed this with my second grade daughter. Once there's a break from her Google Meet, she avoids all school-related conversation. She doesn't want to talk about her learning or her school day and often says she hates it. I don't blame her, nor her wonderfully patient and compassionate teacher at Prospect. Elementary school children should not be learning remotely, even part-time, and it is an extreme disservice to their emotional, mental, and physical well-being. The fact should override all fear associated with full-time learning, in-person instruction. Schools are not spreaders of COVID, and they are a safe place to learn and teach. Where I teach, desks have barriers, so 6 feet distancing is not necessary. And this is not anything new. This mandate came out way back when, because this came out, we did this in October. It was 6 feet or barriers. So, the distancing is not necessary. Masks are worn at all times, and never once have I had a case of COVID in my classroom. That is 4 full months of uninterrupted in-class instruction, and I'm hoping all the way to June, and I'm quite confident that that will happen. I'm confident that our home school district here in Pelham will also have a successful rollout into full-time in-person instruction. I just hope it's not too late for some of our most impressionable and vulnerable students. Thank you.
Hi, Greg Slosky, 205 Loring Avenue. I have a 5th grader and a 3rd grader at Colonial School. I'll be brief. I wanted to just add my voice to those here who've spoken and ask this board and this administration to do everything in its power to reopen for full-time in-person learning this spring. You know, I say that and I stand here in awe of the effort and the commitment that I've seen from my kids' teachers in incredibly difficult circumstances. I've also seen 2.5 days a week how wholly inadequate I am as an educator, and I don't think there's any way that we can replace the experience of full-time in-person learning. It is so critical for our children, and I think it is so critical that we get back there this spring. I know that as a country and as a community, we are spending a lot of time talking about racial disparities. I am no expert, but it is my strong feeling that remote learning exacerbates all disparities. Educational disparities, health and well-being disparities, economic disparities for families that have to step away from work, racial disparities as well. Please, please, continue your work to bring us back full-time in person this spring. With your leadership, I'm confident we can do it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Scott Wolfgang. I live at 12 Sherwood Avenue. I want to thank you guys for having more urgency to get the kids back for a full-time in-person, hopefully this spring. I also want to thank Jackie DeAngelis, who's brought together a lot of parents like us who would like a full-time in-person option. There was a member of our group, a parent, who was unable to make it tonight, and so I wanted to read this letter for her. This is from Renee Anker, 90 Boulevard, and she writes, "Good evening. I want to start by acknowledging that we all want things to return to normal. I can't imagine there's a single person in this room or listening to this meeting virtually that isn't thinking, when will this end? It's been just about a year since this thing called COVID developed into what most will categorize as the worst nightmare of our lives. After a semester of virtual last spring, which spilled over into the summer of potting, whilst listening to others judging what others were and were not doing, which then developed into a hybrid school schedule for the fall and winter of 2020-2021. I can say wholeheartedly that we need to find a way to reopen our schools. I would be failing my children more than I already feel like I am if I did not stand up here tonight and urge you to find a way to return to full-time instruction now, even if it is only for the last few months of school. I have lived in Pelham for 11 years and have 3 children in our elementary schools, 2 in Colonial and 1 in special ed at Siwanoy. Each of them has been blessed with amazing teachers who, despite the challenges of technology and the hybrid teaching environment, particularly with elementary-age children, have managed to make it work. Their teachers have maintained positivity and poise in the virtual classroom despite the challenges they face every day, and for that I am grateful. But that has not been enough to overcome the impact virtual school has had on them or our family. My daughter, who is in kindergarten, is a high-spirited, bright-eyed, social little girl who thrives on human interaction. She is also asthmatic and has been hospitalized 3 times in her 5 years of life as a result. So you can imagine her physical health in light of COVID worries me every single day. Yet after almost a year of virtual learning, I worry more about her mental health than her physical health. Kindergarten is not meant to be taught virtually. She simply cannot and does not learn when she is at home. We try, we really do. We have changed the location where she learns to mitigate distractions. We have flipped between an iPad and a computer to see what works best. We have sat next to her, away from her, and on top of her. But unless she is sitting in a classroom among a group of other kids who are mindfully listening to their teacher, she will not escape her normal 5-year-old desire to go do something else. As a result, I spend more time logging her in and out. She knows how to say Google Classroom is not working anymore than she does actually going to school. She hates school. She cries when she has to get on the computer. She wants to be with her friends and learn about them, with them, which is what kindergarten is about. Kindergarten requires role modeling, but how can our teachers be expected to be role models when every day they are balancing between the needs of the in-person classroom and the needs for those who are virtual? It's an impossible ask, so this year will be a wash. My 3rd grader at Colonial also struggles. He's a smart kid who tells me he loves virtual learning, but I've learned that to be because it gives him more iPad time, more pajama time, more freedom to change windows when he doesn't like what the teacher is teaching. I've seen him go from wanting to be out with his friends every day to now preferring just being home and playing virtual Roblox with them instead. I have seen him regress significantly in other ways. His executive functioning is lower because he isn't having to actually get himself together for school every day. So the lack of routine in putting together his homework, books, clothes, etc. has made him forgetful. The lack of homework has caused us to work harder reviewing things he's learned. His enthusiastic attitude towards going to school has been replaced with ambivalence. All of my children require my or my babysitter's assistance during the day, whether it's unfreezing the computer, finding their schedule, or simply transitioning from one classroom to another. I challenge you to find a kindergarten student who can do this on his own. They require assistance, but I'm only one person, and I have a full-time job, so I've increased my babysitter's hours to assist. but she is only one person. So the stress during the day when there is only one of us and either 2 or 3 elementary age kids is palpable. If one thing disrupts the learning environment, a whole hour or sometimes a day can be lost. And as this has stretched on for almost a year now, each day has become more critical than the last. I understand that there are CDC guidelines, state mandates, and sidebar letters in place with the teachers union. I also understand that there are risks with contracting COVID in school, but it is one that I think, based on science that I have read, pales in comparison to the risks of my child's long-term mental health, socialization skills, and academic success. I appreciate that there are some who may not agree with how I weigh the risk, but what I am asking for tonight is that you continue to do the work with whomever you need to in order to find a way to offer the full-time option for those who feel as I do. Other communities around us are doing it, and it pains me to see us behind the 8 ball in this one. I have lived here 11 years, and I know what Pelham is capable of. I urge this to happen now and not next year, because like this year, no matter how hard we try, there will be unanticipated challenges, and time is no longer on our side as this pandemic threatens to stretch into the foreseeable future. If we act now, we can assess, evaluate, and prepare for next year based on what we learned from this year's full-time in-person challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this ends our first public comment period and brings us to 4.2, which is Board of Education Committee reports. Do we have any committee reports? I don't think so. Okay. 4.3 is Assistant Superintendent's update on authentic learning. Dr. Garcia.
Good evening. I'm not going to get too deep, and obviously there's been a lot of talk about many different topics. However, there's been one update that I wanted to share with the board and also the community, and you may have heard, as you know, before the break, New York State did apply for a waiver for the grades 3 through 8 state assessments and also the REACH exams this school year in accordance with the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is a federal legislation which requires each state to offer these exams, and it's tied into accountability. Well, this is yesterday that the U.S. Department of Education stated to all the municipalities that it will not grant a blanket waiver for the administration and accountability of state assessments this year. They did say that they will agree to uncouple state assessments from accountability measures so that the test will not be used solely as a measure of will be used solely really as a measurement of student learning. So they're you think about the APPR and the way we evaluate teachers and principals, that is supposed to be separate, just like it was in the past last year when we didn't have the exams. They said, don't worry about accountability. Apparently, the federal government's saying you have to administer these state assessments, but you don't have to tie it to accountability. So that has kind of left a lot of questions unanswered. The U.S. Department of Education also affirmed that no student should be made to come to school to take a state assessment this year. By the way, this year, we don't know if that means this school year or this calendar year. So the New York State Education Department will be proposing a series of regulations and amendments at its upcoming March Board of Regents meeting. They'll be talking about Regents exams as well, because that may be sort of separate from the accountability pieces with the Every Student Succeeds Act. So we may see some changes with Regents exams. And really, I just wanted to say that there's still things which are up in the air. Personally, I was a little surprised that the federal government said that we should continue with these state assessments this year. And I think there's just a lot of leeway for each state to decide what that looks like and what that actually means. So as the Board of Regents makes the decision, and I will be sharing that information with the community, but also with the board, hopefully at the next meeting or some other meeting in March. So that's why I want. It's kind of, like I said, it was kind of shocking. We didn't know this would happen, but again, we don't know what these assessments will look like, the length, and so forth and so on, or even when they will occur. But we will make sure the community and also the board is updated as long as we, whenever we find out soon enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, welcome
Or-
to education with a
Or
grade.
lack thereof. I mean, I'm imagining all these states where the kids have been virtual since March and haven't gone back, and they're just going to go back. Like, are they planning on virtually assessing?
Yeah.
There's been more states that have been all virtual than not since March. so-
Look, it's par for the course. So we'll make do and we'll figure it out.
Yeah. Guess we're a better position than others. Okay, very good. So the next is 4.4, Assistant Superintendent's update on the whole child. Ms. Chung.
Good evening. I have a couple of items that I want to report on tonight. The first is from our counseling office. We're offering the ACTs for our students on campus here this coming Tuesday, next Tuesday, and we have about 80 students signed up. So we were trying to figure out how to manage the space, and we're going to figure out a way to move students around so that we can create a space to make sure that our students can get their test here with the social distancing and with appropriate supervision. So that'll be provided next Tuesday. The second item is just, I wanted to elaborate a little bit on what Dr. Cham spoke about earlier in terms of surveillance testing. So we picked up the test on Wednesday before the break. And since then, we've given 111 tests to adults and students. And we've had actually just one positive case from the rapid testing. We were actually hoping, today was the first abbreviated Wednesday, so we're hoping to get a large group of students today, but my hope was for about 70 students. We ended up with about 40. But I think just based on today's experience, because today's was the larger testing, I'm going to be making some changes so that next Wednesday, I'm going to open up a lot more slots just so that it'll be a little bit easier for people to sign up. And after going through this once with 4 different stations and I'm having all of the nurses here, I think we'll be able to accommodate a lot more people. So I'm hoping that we'll get a much greater sign up for next week. And we're going to also start right after school. Today we started at 1:30 because I wanted to give the nurses and everyone kind of some time to set up and give them an opportunity to have lunch, take a break, and then come. But I think just given the fact that we weren't able to get as many number of students as we had hoped, they actually brought it to me and said, let's just start at 12:15. So we're going to just start right after school, and hopefully we'll have more secondary students in, because Wednesday afternoons we're hoping to really dedicate that time to secondary students. In terms of positive cases, since past Sunday, so in the last 4 days, we actually had 12 positive cases on top of the one from the rapid test. So we actually had 13 positive cases in 4 days that we're aware of. So, it changes, week to week, but obviously after the break, I think we may have had a little bit more, a higher number. It's only Wednesday, so we shall see what the next couple of days bring. But I wanted to just also summarize the surveillance testing process for families, because we actually had a family that stopped by today thinking that we might be able to do testing for them to test out of travel quarantine, which we cannot do. So the only thing that we can really use the surveillance testing for is just for surveillance. And so it's for asymptomatic students, and this cannot get anyone out of like a quarantine situation. Also, just more information for families. We are doing testing every single day. So it's not just Wednesday afternoons. We are testing in every single building, including elementary schools. But the bulk of it, we're hoping to do on Wednesday afternoons. In terms of the high-risk sports, and I know that that was a concern that was brought up at the last meeting, and we also had some parents that shared concerns about that after the meeting. And I just want to kind of reassure the families that I am working with Mr. Hodge, the athletic director, to make sure that even though we didn't mention that it was mandatory, I'm working with him to make sure that we're rotating all of our athletes through. And so out of I think we have about a little more than 200 students within those high-risk sports categories. I'm hoping to test about 20 to 25% every week. And so we are taking a large chunk of the number of students that we're testing to be those students. And so we are doing our best to make sure that we're monitoring our high school students. In terms of elementary school students, as Dr. Champ mentioned before, that is something that we're thinking about in terms of putting into place before we can bring more kids back. We're definitely going to start that in the next couple of weeks, and I'll be sending out information to the families on how to sign up. Actually, I used Pick a Time that parents typically use for parent conferences, and I did that for the Wednesday today sign up, and I think that actually worked out really well. So I'm going to probably do that for elementary schools as well, so that they can sign up their students. So that'll happen in the next couple of weeks. And then just lastly, I just want to ask the families, please sign up when I send out the communication, because again, I was really hoping that we would get a good number today, and we only ended up with about 40. So I really would like to get about 80 to 100 students on a Wednesday. So hopefully, I'll send out reminders more often, but hopefully we'll get more volunteers. So, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Have you been able, since we've approved high-risk sports 3 weeks ago, we've had 3 teams that had to quarantine, and which was a little surprising to me, but have we noticed any uptick in positive cases from that population?
Well, so there were some cases that were related within one team. Again, I can't say if that is from playing together or if these are students that are hanging out together. Obviously, they're teammates, they're friends. So it's a little difficult for me to say. In terms of when you're just looking at the numbers, 12, 13 in 4 days, I think, is a lot.
Yeah.
But again, out of those 13 numbers, 3 of them were from the recreation activity from last week. So, they were elementary students as well. So I think it depends on how close students get and whether they're careful or not in terms of being around each other. So honestly, I can't really answer your question.
You're not willing to go there. Okay, that's fair. Put you on the spot.
But we did have 3 teams that quarantined in the last 3 weeks, so, yeah.
And also, can you just speak to, I don't know if it was a change in the guidance or in the requirements, or if it was just a reiteration of the expectations, but it's my understanding that we interpret things now to say that unless you're exposed or have symptoms, you're not mandated to test for re-entry to be accepted into the classroom and/or sports. We got emailed something in the last week that said you can't hold somebody back from sports or the classroom.
There was a memo, and then a clarifying memo, and then legal guidance, then another clarification.
Unless a student was exposed or...
We weren't doing anything wrong.
No, I'm not saying that we are, but I just want to put it out there. Like,
Yeah,
we
it
can't
didn't change
force,
any
you can't
practice,
force somebody to test for participation in sports or school
And
unless they've been exposed or have symptoms.
I think there was one
Did I
caveat in...
misunderstand that?
There was one caveat in that language that if I followed all the train of thought, unless your local Department of Health directs or
Like, put us in the yellow zone or the red zone?
no,
Or not even that?
they could even just say that school districts have the authority to require it.
Okay.
So, yeah. So that's really what it came down. And honestly, it's so muddy right now that I'd rather even us come back to you with a
Okay.
follow-up response to
I
that.
remember seeing that email alert, and I didn't think that we were
Yeah.
doing anything wrong. It just
Yeah, no,
kind of
and-
highlighted sort of the way we approach all
Yeah.
this. Like, I'm assuming that teammates will want to be able to play and that they want to, have a successful
Yeah.
season, so they're more inclined perhaps to test if it's open to them, but,
I think that memo came from the fact that there were a number of districts that either required, I think there is the authority to require testing that could have been part of the board's resolution when we passed that. There were districts that were requiring students to switch to full virtual if they wanted to participate in high-risk athletics.
I've heard that many.
Yeah, so I think it
Or
kind of came
coaches who
from-
are highly encouraging students
Yeah,
to
and
go all
that's
virtual so they
not
think
something that should be happening, but that, I think, it was coming from some of the.
non-Pelham. I'm just saying.
Yeah, it
another
was coming,
school.
I think, from some decisions that have been made around high-risk sports to try to provide a level of comfort for some folks, but it also was making, some districts had just made some decisions that were not necessarily.
aligned.
Sorry about that, Chris. Yeah, it just came from decisions that some districts were making around, because of their pause around implementation of high-risk sports. So I think the intent was to make sure that schools understood that they couldn't restrict students from accessing their education to be part of high-risk sports. But let us follow
Okay.
up with you about just a more clear written response of that
I mean, it just
stance.
came out a few days ago. I think it's towards the end of the break, whatever email came
Yeah,
to me. So
yeah, no, and you're right, but I think there was about 2 or 3 subsequent clarifications and reclarifications.
like everything.
Yeah, exactly. People rush to put guidance out, then they spend more time clarifying it than they did writing it in the first place.
Okay,
Sorry, I'm a little down on guidance these days.
I wonder why. Anybody else? Okay. 4.5 is Assistant Superintendent's update on finance and facilities.
Hi, thank you and good evening. And to quote the late, great Yogi Berra, it's deja vu all over again with our budget cycle. And here we go again. Everyone has their budget, which I've provided on your tables, and as we've done every year. Certainly happy to meet with any members of the board individually, small groups. If you have any questions, you'd like to go over those, any questions of the book. Prior to meetings, after meetings, send emails. Certainly we'll make ourselves available as much as possible to provide any answers to questions that you may have. Thank you to my colleagues and certainly to our folks in our business office for putting the book together as you go through it, and we share it with the community. It will be online. You can see that there's quite a bit of detail in this budget book, and that's really helpful, I think, to explain the pattern of budgeting. And again, this is a plan, and the budget is a plan for spending for the next year, and things can change. Certainly, I don't think we ever contemplated the change that we saw this year when we did last year's budget. But again, it's part of a developing plan, and it's your policy document for the next year. In that, we know there are some changes. I know I shared with the board some information about our state funding. That's not yet finalized. There have been some changes with the STAR funding, and I think I provided a nice illustration of where STAR has been and where they're asking it to go at the state level. And it gets a little complicated, so I think the pictures were kind of nice. We saw the 4 different stages of where it's gone from year to year, and that's something that we'll also provide additional information with and spend a little bit more time on March 6th. So again, if you have any questions, happy to do that. And in your books, we also talked about that 2% contingency. That's all in your books. We don't release, of course, that to the public because there is some collective bargaining information in there. But just so you're aware, it is in your books, and also so members of the public are aware that board members do have access to that, and it's fully transparent to yourselves. We're doing our transportation letters, and this is a reminder to everybody for folks who are seeking transportation to school outside of district. These are students that attend private or parochial schools. If you're within a 15-mile radius, you have a April 1st deadline to apply for requesting for that transportation. If you're thinking about it, please put in a request. You're not bound to that, and you can put in a request for one school. We have sent letters to people who are currently have students being transported outside of the district. Got an ad in the Journal News. We've sent emails to parents. It's on our webpage. And certainly, board members, we encourage you to share with folks and people who are watching to also share with friends and neighbors who they know who are either have students attending out of district or are thinking about it. Our construction is progressing nicely. In this evening's budget document, we have 2 administrative change order notifications that we've provided to the board for credits. Just as a reminder, for change orders less than $50,000, they can be approved administratively at varying levels, either by myself or by Dr. Champ. These 2 are for credits totaling $8,900. And then we have 1 administrative change order approved at Prospect Hill. That was a cost of $3,100. Total credit, again, for both of them, $5,800 credit on those 2 change orders. And the backup is all provided on board docs, and you can see all the detail behind it. The Prospect Hill, it had to do with the drainage, a modification to the drainage. I think I mentioned that at the last meeting. And at Hutchinson, one was to do with the outside, with the siding or the exterior of the building, and the other one had to do with, I believe it was with Carrie and Walsh, our HVAC contractor. This evening, we also have a public hearing for a district-wide safety plan. This is something that we normally do every summer. Because of the pandemic, and there was really, when we looked at a district-wide safety plan, it was originally developed kind of looking at your outward threats. And I don't think it really ever contemplated protocols for a public health emergency. And that's certainly what we've had over the last year. And what we've had to do and what's happened is the governor signed legislation in the fall requiring school districts to provide protocols for a public health emergency. We have that information that we've provided here for a public hearing this evening. We're asking you to have that public hearing, and then we'd ask you to approve it at the next board meeting. These protocols were put together with our security consultant, Altiris, and they've done this similar work with districts throughout the county and the tri-state area. So again, a nice benefit of having Altiris work on this particular plan with us. This really just gets us to the end of the school year, though, because then at the beginning of the school year, again in July, we're going to bring you the whole district-wide safety plan again. This will be, of course, incorporated into the larger document, and you'll see that next year. We also have just participation in BOCES bids. We've got generous donations. We have 2 personnel items. One is just to hire a monitor, someone to help us with our COVID testing, to help Julia and her group get that work done. And then last, we have a retirement in the business office. I'm going to ask that the board not accept it. Of course, you're going to have to accept it, but certainly a longtime employee, Astrid Dennison, who does our payroll and benefits administration district-wide, is retiring. She's been with the district since 2007. We are certainly going to miss her. She's given us our 6 months notice. She's breaking up the band, but we're certainly going to miss her, and we are very, very excited for her at the same time, of course. And I know she's a neighbor to many in the community, and she's been here for quite some time. So those are my high points. Thank you.
Thank you. So this brings us to the public hearing that you mentioned. So I'd like to take a motion to recess the public meeting to a public hearing. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thanks, Leah. Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? So 5.2 is the motion to convene the public hearing on the district safety plan with respect to protocols for a public health emergency. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Anything in particular?
No, again, if I could just share again, this was a result of legislation signed back in the fall. As required, we need to have this public hearing and also incorporate it as part of our district-wide safety plan.
Any questions or comments?
I had a question on it. I was reading the new part that was added, the public health emergency,
Yes.
and I'm not going to be able to find it now, but there was some part in it where it was talking about what we would do to continue school, and it mentioned a hybrid program where students attend half a day. So is that to say that that would be our default plan going forward if this were to happen again, kind of?
No, I think what we tried to do is we want to create a plan that creates as much flexibility as possible. So it may be a half-day plan, it may be a cohort plan, and that's something we can add a and/or.
Okay, I'll try to find it again, and then I found it on my computer at home. But
Sure, and as you look at it, when you see the essential employees, you can see it pretty much lists everybody in the school district, and really it's a matter of, as needed, we can really relegate those people to an essential service if needed, and if they're not needed, at that point, they wouldn't be then delegated and as essential person. But that's kind of how we looked at it as that group.
Okay, here it is. It's on page 9. It says class schedules, if scheduled to be on site, will be staggered to a morning and afternoon cohort.
Great point.
Which I just didn't know.
Yeah, so let's look at that and make sure we've got the flexible language that incorporates that. We'll certainly address that for the final approval that we'll bring to the board at the March 26th meeting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Took a motion, but I didn't vote. Is this something that we're voting on?
We'll ask you to approve it at the next meeting. This is just for the,
Okay.
for the public hearing.
So this was just the motion to convene a public hearing, so I guess, all in favor of having done what we just did? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. 5.3 is communications and comments from the public. We do not have public anymore. So 5.4 is a motion to close the public hearing. Do I have a motion? Thanks, Leah. Second? Thanks, Jess. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Now I'd like to take a motion to reconvene the public meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thanks, Eileen. Do I have a second? There's enough for everybody to go around. Thanks, Benny. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Just want to make sure you're all participating. Okay, Section 6, financial reports and motions. I'd like to take a consent of 6.1 to 6.3. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thanks, Sue and John. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? I'd like to take a consent of 6.4 to 6.5. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thanks, Benny. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thanks, John. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, I'd like to take 6.6 on its own, a motion to accept a donation. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thanks, Jess. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thanks, Eileen. Okay, so this is a donation. Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Pelham Union Free School District does hereby accept the donation of $500 for math and science program support, and that gratitude be bestowed upon its donor, the Exxon Mobil Educational Alliance. And we have another donation. Be it further resolved that the Board of Education in Pelham does hereby accept the donation of $5,822.78 for Grant 2106 Diversity Book Bags at Hutchinson and Prospect Hill Elementary Schools, and that gratitude be bestowed upon its donor, the Pelham Education Foundation, and also that the Pelham Union Free School District Board of Education does hereby accept the donation of an instrumental bell kit for the Prospect Hill Elementary School Band, and that gratitude be bestowed upon its donor, Alejandro Luciano. Very generous. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Section 7, Policy Monitoring and Governance. 7.1 is the second reading of Policy 3420, Non-Discrimination and Anti-Harassment in the District. Eileen.
Yes, the only thing that changed on this is that we identified Dr. Garcia and Ms. Chung to be our CROCs. Is that right? CROCs, yes.
Or COs.
CRCOs. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Getting late.
But nothing else changed.
Any questions or comments? So we'll do a third reading at our next meeting?
I think we should take it to the third reading, yeah.
Very good. And you have your next
Our
policy
next
meeting?
meeting, we're just talking about scheduling it for the first couple days of March, so
Great.
we'll have some more stuff.
Coming our way.
Coming.
Very good. Section 8 is Superintendent's Personnel Recommendations. I'd like to take a consent of 8.1 to 8.4. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thanks, Ben. A second? Thanks, Sue. You have to look up, too. Any questions or comments? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Sadly, we've accepted Astrid's resignation for retirement.
Say it ain't so.
I know.
So sad.
Big loss.
Okay, Section 9, People Personnel Services. We have a Schedule D. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thanks, Leah. Second.
Second.
Thanks, Jess. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Section 10, New Business. Do we have any new business? Going once, going twice. Sold to no new business. We've already done communications and comments from the public. You tell I'm getting a little punchy, sorry guys. It's been a lot of opening and closing of meetings and moving things around.
Yeah, cut her off from the caffeine.
Okay, so this brings us to adjournment of the meeting.
Madam President, would you entertain a motion to adjourn, despite the fact that I'm going to lose my bet? was
So
saying-
moved. Did I move too quickly? So moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thanks, Benny. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Good night, everybody. Just remember, this will be way shorter than March 6th's meetings.
True.